All right, here's the good news. This is the last lecture of this week. Okay. Here's the bad news. This is the last lecture of the week. This has been fun to talk about. I hope you've enjoyed this little spiel in economics. Again, maybe you're starting to see a pattern here. What we're trying to do with this class is talking about the different parts of liberal arts and different sections, across the spectrum of liberal arts, political science, economics, religion, family. That transcends a whole bunch of different things. But we were finishing up this week talking about now personal finance. So talked about structures of governments, and you can see how in governmental decisions now, if we took the top-down method and decisions made about how we view economics and big macroeconomic policies affect money supply, and then that affects us on a personal level. We're going to look a little bit more closely now at the personal and family level. Now, what's the impact of this move away from the gold standard? And like we've seen an example of, if you can just print all the money you want, and productivity supply does not come up with that increase in money. Okay, so here's another figure from the Institute for Family Studies from the University of Virginia. And this is a figure just showing both black and white. So looking at both these ethnic groups, you can see the different family arrangements. So living with two parents in first marriage is the yellow bar. The gray bar is living in a likely step-parent family. Likely, because they're not really sure, obviously. And blue is living with a single parent. Okay, and the figure is child poverty rate by child's race and family living arrangements. All right, so you have, again, black and white children, and then the family living arrangements. So the red, yellow bar, if we compare that to the blue one for both black children and white children, you can see that living with a single parent produces a higher poverty rate. Okay, 46% in black children and 33% in white children, versus living with two parents. The first marriage, black children is 13% and white children is 5%. So significant reduction between both. So in other words, just looking at the percentage of reduction from a single parent home to a two-parent home that's quite a big drop in poverty rate. That means that income is higher. And this could be something, there could be a lot of factors here, of course, but one of the simplest is there's two people in the home, therefore there's two incomes. Okay, two incomes. If you think about this another way, this is kind of why I put this slide on here as well, is the assumption here is living with a single parent, that single parentness maybe wasn't ideal. So in other words, maybe an unplanned pregnancy, maybe a divorce, right? Something like that. What if there was two individuals that were in the first marriage and one of them didn't want to work? Okay, so let's say the mom wanted to stay home. What does that mean, right? Well, if you look at these percentages, now there's a lot of factors here. I understand that. What I'm saying, those percentages though, is that would tend to push somebody closer to a child being in poverty. Well, if you're faced with that choice as a parent and you have the opportunity, there's two parents in the home, then probably both are going to work, is what I'm getting at. So because of the change in economics, the whole point of what I'm trying to say here is that it makes it more difficult for individuals that may choose to have one parent stay home. They can't make that choice anymore, right? I know it's a choice that my own family has faced, right? That makes it very difficult, even if one parent did want to stay home. Now, if you look back at family dynamics, in the United States, like we look back in the sexual revolution, even back into the 1950s. Now, thinking about this in a different way, women traditionally did stay home. From 1950s pre-World War I, that was tradition. If a woman wanted to, she could too. Like, it wasn't a necessity that a woman had to work outside the home per se. And now, even if a woman wanted to stay home, that's more difficult. Okay, so that's what I'm getting at here is because of economics, that's changed potentially how family structure could be. If a woman wanted to stay home, and we think about nutrition now, well, how many more meals at home would be possible if one of the parents, not even just the woman, but if one of the parents wanted to stay home, how many more meals would be possible at home? Okay, now again, that's remember this. There's no judgment in any of this. My wife works and I work. I grew up in a working family, right? Both my mom and dad worked, so that this is not judgment, but I'm asking questions about What effect does economics have? This is the point. What effect has economic policies had on the well-being of moderns today? Okay. Well, you can see probably how significant, like a Keynesian thought about even fiat currency and the gold standard has changed significantly economic structures. Okay. All right. Just another bit of bad news here. Figure on the right is showing you purchasing power now. So in current dollars, you see the yellow line, that all the way back 1964, and then all the way over to 2018. If you just follow the yellow line, don't get this confuse you, but if you follow the yellow line, it's $2.50 per hour. This is hourly wage in 1964. Today, the hourly wage is $22.65 on average. Well, that's good, right? Okay. Well, that $22.65 is the hourly wage today. Now it's followed the green line back to 1964. This is, think of this as purchasing power. Okay. If you go back to 1964, that dollar, or 1964, that $2.50 was worth $20.27 in your purchasing power. Today, it's $22.65. So while hourly wage has maybe got almost $20 an hour, over $20 an hour, purchasing power has declined. Okay, your purchase power has only up $2 and 25 cents or something like that. So even though the hourly rate is better, your purchasing power of the hourly rate is roughly the same as what it was in 1964. Okay, is that okay with you? It's not okay with me, right? I want my dollar to be able to purchase more than that. Okay, because that means in the face of an hourly wage increase, other goods and services are becoming more expensive. Well, why is that, right? Why is that? All right, and you can see, but interestingly, you see the two lines seem to be running together if you follow them early. And when you get to about 1971, see that little blip where it's the number 2018 is? You see that little blip there? That was, when I figured that around 1971, 1972. And then what happens to that purchasing power's steady incline? It flattens. Okay. So yet another data point to look at and say, wow, moving off the gold standard. Okay. That really hurt. That really hurt the value of the dollar. I think that goes without saying now, right? And that's an idea for modernity. Okay. So I have a case study for you because, who doesn't want a good case study? I'm going to put myself over here again. You can see the word education. Apologies. In higher education. So you're dealing with the cost of education. I had to deal with the cost of education. So let's look at that. So what I have here on the right is, think about the Harvard that we looked at last week. Those students, they didn't have a lot of amenities. They just went to class. In fact, their classes were, like we talked about, was more liberal arts focused. Well, this is LSU's Lazy River. Okay, it's an $85 million facility at LSU, and there's other lazy rivers now. There was a rock wall competition for a while, like which university had the biggest rock wall. Now it's which university can have the biggest water feature, right? And this is something the students said they wanted, and so the university obliged. $85 million. Okay, my question for you is, where'd that money come from? Okay, where did it come from? All right, so let's look a little bit at the history of higher ed as a case study. Okay, now across the bottom is the years, and on the y-axis is percent change in college costs and earnings for young workers. So it's a percent change in whatever we're plotting. Okay, so on the light blue line is average earnings. Okay, so we saw that on the last slide with earnings have been flat. All right, so earnings have been pretty flat. What about the college costs, though? College costs since 1980 have skyrocketed at over 160%. All right, so as you know, we're not earning more money. Let's say you, as a college student, isn't earning more money really than you were in this particular graph back in 1980. Maybe 20%. Okay, don't make sure I give credit where credit's due. 20% higher earnings, average earnings. Okay, 22 to 27-year-olds. But the college costs have gone up over 160%. Why is there such a disconnect? Well, what do you think? Do you think this lazy river has anything to do with it? What about student loans? So thinking about M2 and velocity of money and fiat currency, if the perception is that there's money that's quote-unquote free, and people start to rack up that debt If you are a business that people are coming to you with lots of money and saying, I want your service, and I expect more out of your service. Okay, well, I'm going to build a lazy river. And because now everybody wants to come here and I may have limited resources, I'm going to jack up the cost of education, but I'm going to also spend some of that money on lazy river, right? So all that money isn't necessarily spent on more professors. It's spent on more things like the amenities, okay? So when you see a football game, and a lot of these sports teams, to be fair, have huge booster clubs that subsidize a lot of their costs. But when you look at these big amenities, though, that are associated with universities, maybe one of the questions you ask yourself is, why is college so expensive? And why I'm not earning more? Well, it's maybe because there's been a lot of money thrown at something, in this case higher ed, that is using it for other things other than what it actually costs to educate. Okay. Now I put on some different time points here in understanding this question. Again, we're thinking about things critically. This is not I'm not trying to make a point and just for the sake of making a point here. I want you to think critically. You could say, I don't buy your argument. Fair enough. Okay. But we're thinking critically about something. If we're going to make decisions about higher education, right? You hear people talking about this in the news all the time. We have to understand where we came from and the causes for where we are today. If the student debt crisis is still a problem, then we have to look at why. Okay. And is it the student's fault? Is it the university's fault? Is it the government's fault? I don't know. Let's look at some facts and you guys can make the decision. So 1965, there's a lot of things that were before this, but these were significant things that happened. I'm talking about things like acts and moves towards student loans. 1965, the Higher Education Act was employed. So this was the first opportunity for student loans to be made available. That was ramped up under in the 90s, even more so. There was more access to student loan money in the 1990s. By 2004, the student loan debt was $345 billion following this 1965 and the move in the 1990s towards more student loan accessibility. And now student loan debt, at least in 2021, was $1.7 trillion. So what do you guys think? Is this lazy river have something to do with that excess increase in average college costs? Is it the access to student loan debt, really, the student loans, that has caused this rapid increase in student loan debt? I don't know. I have my opinions on it. I'm sure you can already probably surmise it's a combination of things. But when we tackle, when I say this is a case study, when we tackle a topic like this, because this does affect your wellness and mine, right? The cost of education is certainly going to affect your wellness, not just financially, right? But the stress of those financial obligations, right, are going to affect your physical, right? And so it's going to affect your emotional, and so on and so forth. So when we're looking at issues like this, again, this is where we don't look at I'm just going to throw this out there. I'm not for or against this. I'm just talking as if you say forgive student loan debt. Okay, if you forgave everybody's debt at $1.7 trillion, there's going to be an effect of that as well. But does that fix the problem, right? If you forgive debt, our college is going to increase the cost even more, right? Because they know that debt will be forgiven, and that's going to make it even harder to go to college. I don't know. Those are things that I want you to wrestle with and think about critically. But that's going to require you to slow down and think about all these different facts and put together what you think is an appropriate solution if you're going to be offering your opinion on the particular topic at some point. So again, that's part of this class, thinking critically about a topic that affects our wellness today and looking at the historical basis for it. So let's look at a cost per credit hour. I think you'll find this interesting as well as you think about this problem, right? Because this is a case study. So at the bottom, let's compare private 4 years, first of all. So private 4 year, $488 per hour, but on campus is $1,240, right? $1,240. A public 4 year online is $316. A public 4 year on campus is $311. So that would seem to go in the face of my showing you the lazy river, the $85 million LSU lazy river. Well, if online education costs per credit hour the same amount as in-person education, okay, doesn't that mean that lazy river has no... Right, it doesn't matter. Well, maybe. So remember, the difference between private and a public university is public universities are funded by taxpayer dollars, where private universities have to be funded solely by tuition. They have no external help. Okay, so any amenity that a private 4 year might have is going to have to be paid for by tuition dollars only, and boosters and endowments and things like that. Where a public 4 year could have an endowment and all those wonderful things to finance their amenities, etc. But then they have taxpayer dollars on top of it. So if you say, well, we're all in college, that's why I'm talking to you right now. If you say, okay, well, this won't affect people as a whole, well, even people who don't go to into university are paying for the increase in higher ed costs is the point. Okay, even the increase. And I think that's something worth looking at as a case study as we look at economics and we look at how it's affecting our wellness, even as you graduate, right? And you're like, okay, I'm no longer in the system. I may have student loans, I may not, but I'm paid back my obligation. I'm free of university, right? Not necessarily. If you're from Oklahoma, you'll be paying for all the Oklahoma universities and all the subsidies that are associated with that, which could include lazy rivers. Okay, so just something to consider. As we're looking at the real cost of education. And finally, just what we've done in the past is, hopefully you've seen this pattern as well, is we look at a problem, modernity's extension into some things that doesn't obviously apply many times to like wellness. So we were talking about money though, so I think the application here is a little bit easier. But I did, and I know the word loans under here, sorry about that. But I did have one figure I wanted to show about delayed starting a family, depending on then the amount of student debt that an individual is carrying. So if you look at this figure on the left, your left is the years, 1970 all the way up to 2010, 2011 school years. And the dark line is the average federal loans per FTE student. So the cost of education. Okay, so basically if we just look at the dark line for now, you can see that line has been slowly increasing, right? From 1970, the cost was $1,000. All the way up to almost $7,000 by 2010 and 2011. So in other words, the cost of education has been slowly rising. What about, by the way, all these figures are in 2010 dollars, so they've been adjusted, right? You can't say it was just the $1970. This was all adjusted for inflation. Now the dotted line though is average age at first birth in women. Okay, so the y-axis for this is on the right side where it says age, and the axis for the monetary stuff is on the left side. So let's look at the age y-axis on the right, and you can see that dotted line from 1970. The age of a woman giving birth to her first child was 21.5 years. What's that age now? Almost 26 years old. 25 and a half, sorry. So about 25 and a half years old before giving birth to the first child. Okay, now, if you look at the periods between like 1986 and 1990, right, you see that there's still an increase in the average age of the first child as compared to the line, the cost per education. And that same period was kind of flatter, okay? But there is some sort of relationship there, right? There is a relationship there between those two. And you could argue that, maybe... more women are going to school, maybe getting graduate degrees now, so they're just out of college later. And so that's why they're starting their families later. Okay, you can make that argument. But if we just look at these two variables, this on the surface, this supports the idea that as the cost of education has gone up, that's delayed the start of, for women that want to start a family, it's delayed the age in which they start a family. And, if we look back at replacement rate and birth rate and all those things, well, here's another effect that has its root in economic theory, Keynesian economics, that may play a part in what has happened here with the cost of education. Or even if it's not Keynesian economics directly, it's in a change in how we view student loans, okay, and the availability of those student loans. That the government should have a place in ensuring everybody can go to college financially, right? And that may seem like an admirable goal, but do you think that's a good idea? To have student loans so everybody can go into debt to go to college, knowing that universities may not be using all that money for the direct cost of education. So in other words, the cost of education is skyrocketing as you try to take loans to pay for that. Those are complex ideas, right? Complex things to think about, okay? But these ideas are from modernity. Okay, and this last little bit, debt burden after college, the effect of student loan debt on graduates, employment, additional schooling, family formation, home ownership. Okay, this is where this figure was from, by the way, as well. But I wanted to highlight a little excerpt from this study that said, among all graduates, those who took out more debt were also less likely to be married, less likely to have a child, and were more likely to have a negative net worth. Regardless of whether one considers being less likely to get married and having children with 4 years at graduating to be a good thing, borrowers are making post-college choices other than what they would have made had they taken on less debt. And this information would be useful as potential borrowers make decisions about how much debt to accrue. Okay? So if you kind of follow that quote there, even if somebody, so the idea is that, okay, not everybody wants to have children, and not, everyone doesn't want to get married. That's fair. But of those that do, their choices have been altered. Okay. And this figure kind of supports that to some degree, right? Their choices have been altered as a result of incurring high student loan debt. Okay. Buying homes, that's what we call net worth, right? All those type of things have been delayed or opportunities lost because of student loan indebtedness. And that's, again, coming back from those ideas of modernity. Okay. I'll leave it there. Sorry to be Debbie Downer. I'm not trying to be. But hopefully you find these ideas interesting as we start to, as we look through the impact of modernity. We're wrestling with ideas. We're thinking about them critically. And if it sounds like I have a bias towards one or the other, ignore it. I want you guys to think about these ideas on your own and wrestle with the materials that are provided and my lectures, etc., as you formulate your answers. Okay, remember, I'm grading you on the quality of your answer, not necessarily the content, right? It could be something diametrically opposed to what I think about a situation, but I just want to see you articulate that, right? And I will not make that known whether I'm diametrically opposed or not. Unless, for some reason you ask and really want to know, I'm not going to tell you. I want you to wrestle this data on your own. All right, I'll see you in the next lectures.